Individual of the day, the outgoing British High Commissioner to Nigeria. In this interview with my colleague Jayesimi, AIT's foreign news editor, spoke about the bilateral issues between Nigeria and Britain, the 2023 general elections, and the popular Japa syndrome. Enjoy the interview, and when we come back, I shall be signing out.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure and honour to serve my country here in Nigeria. It's the job I wanted, the job I've been working towards throughout my career, which is mostly focused on Africa. You can't be a diplomat who specialises in Africa without serving here. It's the biggest, most important country. It's the giant of Africa, and serving here has absolutely lived up to my expectations. It's been a roller coaster, to be honest, and as someone said to me, there's never a dull moment in Nigeria. I had a very good first year, fairly normal year, I would say, where I travelled widely around the country. I wanted to try and get to every one of the 36 states, but then COVID hit. And it was like a jolt out of the blue for all of us. And I turned into a travel agent trying to help evacuate Nigerians and dual nationals and my own staff. We had to draw down all our staff and families. And I was left here with a small team and supporting the Nigerian government dealing with this incredibly difficult set of issues. So that would be, I'd say, a low, but also some upsides from that. I think it really forced us to focus on the key issue that Nigeria needed to address in order to come through this crisis. It also brought the international community together. We're a very, very aligned, cohesive group in Nigeria. We set up something called the Key Political Partners Group during that COVID time, and that's very active and works collectively to support Nigeria. Other sort of challenges and interesting times, of course, I started just before the 2019 election and I finished after 2023. So I've seen some progress, a few setbacks, but overall what I would say, and this is one of my key sort of highlights from my time in Nigeria, Nigeria is the biggest, most important democracy in Africa, and for all its flaws and challenges, you are on that journey, and you should never take that for granted because you're in a region where democracy is backsliding, and indeed globally. But Nigeria sends a bit of a beacon of hope, and I know a lot of people are disappointed with the process and with the outcome, but I would say hang on to that important fundamental that people in Nigeria, your vote does count. Look at the different electoral map. It looks completely different than it did in 2019. Democracy is a journey, it's not an event, so stick with it. So those are a few of my highs and lows.
Now, in the run-up to this latest set of elections, which you've also talked about, the 2023 elections, which is drew to a close a couple of days ago, if I would say, the UK government expresses optimism for a credible exercise. And I was here at the press conference where, just before the elections, where you said, look, Nigerian electorate, I'm re-echoing what the UK Minister of State for Development in Africa, Andrew Mitchell, said, where he said that those who thwart the process, that they'll be sanctioned. Now, apart from the visa, ban and all, which some even argue that does not really touch those fingered in election malfeasance, how else can the UK ensure that deterrents have weight?
Well, you rightly pointed to the statement that we put out before the election by our Minister, Andrew Mitchell. And essentially what that said was that we're watching closely, along with other members of the international community, and those who incite violence or indeed act violently could be subject to a visa ban to our country, or we have other instruments, including our human rights legislation. So I can confirm we're gathering information at the moment. We obviously don't speak about individuals, and we will consider whether we want to exercise those visa bans. So that is one of the tools. That's if you like, a negative tool. But the whole point of that is deterrence, to ensure that people reflect before they act in that way, because elections going well are so important for Nigeria. But in terms of supporting Nigeria's electoral democratic journey, we've been working for many years with INEC to support INEC to help with the Electoral Act. It was a team that we funded, the Policy Legal Advisory Centre, who worked with the National Assembly to get the Electoral Act in place that allowed for electronic voting, a step forward. We also work with civil society in their advocacy role to hold government to account for delivering good elections, and we also support YIAGA, the civil society coalition, who run a parallel vote tabulation to check what the results should be. So we come at it from very different angles, with INEC, with civil society, with our work on the Electoral Act, to ensure we've tried to help Nigeria be as well prepared as possible for this election.
High Commissioner, you spoke about the aspect of working with civil society and the legislature to ensure a key component of our Electoral Act was embedded there, the electoral transmission of results. How did you feel, especially for the presidential election, when the electoral body, which you had worked with, told Nigerians that for almost 48 hours they couldn't get that done?
Yes, so I think just distinguishing the two issues. So in the biometric voter accreditation system did work well, both in the presidential and actually even a bit better at the gubernatorial. So that's a big breakthrough for Nigeria, and it gives people confidence that they are the person who registered to vote, who actually votes. As we've seen in the past, frankly, a lot of people stealing voters' cards, underage voting. You can't do that anymore because you're accredited either biometrically through your irises or through your fingerprint. And IAGA, our civil society partners, confirmed that that worked very well this time. What didn't work well, and was a big disappointment to all of us, and most importantly to Nigerians, was what INEC had raised expectations, that as the results were being tabled at the local polling unit, they would be automatically visible to all of us, actually, to be able to track the results in real time, so transparently. Clearly the system failed, and there's no question. That was a massive disappointment. It also meant that it created space for people to be concerned that somebody's interfering with the system, somebody's hacked into the system. And I think one of the problems was that INEC didn't communicate quickly enough what the challenges were. And we spoke to the INEC chair about this, and he accepted that point, that they should have been able to communicate sooner. I think their problem was they didn't actually know what the problem was. They'd run this in the earlier gubernatorials, the off-cycle ones, and it'd been a little bit creaky, but it started then eventually the results flowing in. So that's what they kept hoping. Okay, it's been a little bit slow, but the results will come in. But it was a failure, and I think it's been a big setback to INEC's credibility, frankly, and therefore people's confidence in the election. Fortunately, it worked better in the gubernatorial, so it shows hopefully that the system in the future will work.
Now let's talk about Nigeria and the UK immigration policy. We have lots of persons who, at the moment, they've traveled to the UK under the what we call local palace. It's a Yoruba word. It's called Japa.
Japa.
It means get with your family, relocate to the UK. They say the UK is quite welcoming. But we noticed in recent times that the policy from the Home Department, it's been seemingly tightened, and there's been some debate even in the UK over why are we shutting the space for people who want to come into this country. For Nigerians who have this desire to come into the UK, is it a seeming, way of saying, look, you can't come to the UK anymore, or you need to be well prepared before you prepare to come into the UK?
So actually, I challenge that. The data and evidence doesn't support that. So let's take student visas to start with. So there were 500,000 student visas issued in, I think, 2020, and 10% of those globally have gone to Nigerians. So that's Nigerians are the third biggest recipients of student visas after India and China. So you're right up there on student visas, and we've actually made it easier for students to stay on after they've studied their master, PhD, or indeed their first degree, because we recognise that they'll be bringing a lot of talent to the country, and we want to ensure we can capture that. In terms of work visas more generally, I think, again, Nigerians actually have been a big beneficiary of our post-Brexit policy, because obviously when we were members of the European Union, our migration was dominated through freedom of movement of European citizens who didn't need a visa, could just come in, take a job, Polish, Hungarians, and so on. We now control our borders, so we can decide who can come in. So we have different categories of work visas, but the area where Nigerians, again, are doing very well is in our sort of high talent visa schemes. So you see a lot of young Nigerians in the IT sector, as well as our more traditional routes for health service professionals. Nigerians dominate that. I think, to be honest, the challenge is making sure that we're not taking that too far, and we're stripping the capability of the Nigerian government, to benefit from the talent that's here. So we have to get the balance right and not look like we're poaching all the best people from Nigeria for the benefit of the UK. But I'm glad you said we're welcoming. We think we are a welcoming country. And Nigerians in the UK, it's like an extended family. So it's pretty easy for Nigerians to come into the UK and to live and thrive there. So there's definitely benefits for both sides, but I think we just need to be cautious that we're not draining too much talent from Nigeria.
Now let's talk about, because you spoke about benefits, let's look at Nigeria and UK bilateral trade. You know, the latest figures from the UK Department of Business and Trade shows that Nigeria is the UK's 39th largest trade partner, contributing a paltry 0.4% to UK's total trade. Now, these are those figures that are there. So there are those who say, with these figures I've just shared, which I've just read, which is from your own department, that Nigeria seems to be far down there. So why is the UK so interested in the bilateral trade along these lines, with the figures I just read, 0.4%?
So I think we definitely can be doing better, both on trade and on inward investment, both ways. So those numbers, I don't know the exact number in total, but what a percentage can look low, but an actual quantity can be quite large.
It's about 3.8 billion. Yes, pounds.
Pounds, yes. So, which, when you put it in those terms, is reasonably substantial. From an Africa point of view, you're the largest economy in Africa, and I think you are our biggest trading partner in Africa. So I would put it more in that context rather than the global context. Obviously those figures will include China, the rest of Europe. I mean, 40% of our trade is still with Europe because we are neighbours of the European Union. Even though we've left, we've Brexited, we still trade with the European Union. But having said that, I think our Trade Secretary, Femi Badenoch, of Nigerian origin. I know my successor, Richmond Montgomery, had a meeting with her as part of his preparation for coming into Nigeria, and she's sort of given us a strong indication that she'd like to see the numbers come up. We do have what we call an Economic Development Forum, which meets on a 6-monthly basis, sort of either in the UK or in Nigeria. So the two ministers, your Minister of Trade and our Minister, co-host that. And what we're trying to do there is work out what are the barriers, why isn't our trade higher, and actually start removing and dismantling them. So from the UK side, for example, one of the big problems is your customs procedures are very bureaucratic, very difficult to navigate. So we need that to be simpler. Another problem for British companies, as with all companies, is the foreign exchange regime. If you're an investor here, you need to be able to import in order to export. So you need access to foreign exchange. So I'm hoping this new incoming administration will help us to really remove some of these barriers for the benefit of the UK, but also for Nigeria.
Let's talk about issues of corruption. The UK has been quite helpful, I would say, in terms of repatriating millions of pounds stolen by politicians and hidden in the UK and other places where the UK has, territorial jurisdiction. Can we talk about this? What are the expectations of Nigerians? There's a new administration coming in. Some are saying, will Nigeria be able to get more from the UK with this new federal administration, or is it a case of let's wait, let's watch and see before we release them? Because I've seen you with our Attorney General, you signed papers for funds that have been repatriated.
So these repatriation processes are very, very complex legal processes. They take a huge amount of time because obviously the evidence that we need to collect in order to enable return stolen assets there's a very high bar. The cases are complicated, but our two teams, the two Attorney Generals, work very closely together with our other law enforcement teams. So we did have a success, I think it's about a couple of years ago now, when we managed to return 4.2 million of the James Abore assets. Which frankly is only the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to come. So that process continues, and I'm glad to say that what has been returned is benefiting Nigeria. It's been invested in infrastructure. It's overseen by a civil society partner, the Clean Foundation, so Nigerians can feel assured that when these funds come back, they are actually benefiting Nigerians. I wish we could do it quicker, but I had a very detailed briefing from my teams, and I feel confident that we're going as fast as we possibly can do, and I'm sure there'll be more of that to come. I don't see any reason why that would change under the incoming administration. All I would say to them is when we ask you to provide evidence, documentation to enable us to process these claims quicker, please do so as fast as possible, because everything gets held up whilst we're waiting potentially for bits of evidence to come from the Nigerian side.
You mentioned the James Abore loot. That was a governor of Delta State, about 1999 to 2007. I'm aware that the state government, not just even the current one, previous ones have said, look, Nigeria runs a federal system, unlike the UK, which runs a unitary system. That look, these funds belong to the Delta state government. UK, please ensure these funds get to the Delta government, not the federal government. That's one talking point they've always raised. It's a naughty legal issue. How is UK helping to ensure the rightful owners of these funds get those funds?
Well, we have to follow your legal procedures on that. So I think, the government has tried to be quite transparent about where the investments are going, which are in 3 or 4 infrastructure projects.
Not in Delta
Not
State.
necessarily in Delta State. But, infrastructure working across the country should benefit all parts of the country. But I understand why the people of Delta State may feel particularly aggrieved because, the governor in this case came from Delta State. But it's like in any federal system, there's certain devolved powers and there's certain reserved powers at the federal level. So we can't change that as the government of the UK. What we can say is that when the funds come back, it must be clear and transparent where they're being invested, and we want independent authorization to oversee that, in this case the Clean Foundation. But we have to work with the laws of the government of Nigeria.
So, High Commissioner, the Nigerian women folk and girls, politically, some progress for those who got elected into public office, but looking at it from all other sides, what's your impression about how Nigeria's fared?
Overall, it's a big disappointment, to be honest. So this time last year, we were hoping that various bills would go through the National Assembly to ensure women's participation in politics, including reserved seats and quotas for women. It's my personal belief strongly that with a country where women are doing so badly in politics, Nigeria's being held back by this, that you need to have quotas in order to move forward, in order to get women to the seat. To enable young women to see these role models. You've got to break the cycle in some way. That didn't happen, and we've just had the election, and sadly we seem to be going backwards. I mean, there are a few areas where women have come through, but overall the numbers are extremely disappointing. So Nigeria is doing worse, for example, than Iran, a country we look to and think women are completely suppressed. So what's going wrong? Why is it Nigerian women do well in all walks of life, both internationally and domestically, at the top of their game in banking, in IT, in what we've often seen as traditionally male-dominated sectors? So what is it about male politicians that is not comfortable with women sitting beside them at the legislative table and not being willing to share that power for the benefit of their country? I'm afraid this has got to change. It's a massive, massive step backwards for Nigeria. When people look at Nigeria's democracy, they don't feel 100% confident because they're not seeing 50% of the female population being represented. It's an embarrassment for Nigeria, frankly. So I will be appealing to the incoming administration. Before I go, one of my key messages is you must fix this. By the next election, we need to have all the machinery in place to enable women to participate within political parties, to claim their rightful seats in the Senate, in the National Assembly, and hopefully as future governors of this country. If you don't do that, Nigeria will never fulfill its potential. No women, no Niger.
Now, with regards to women, let's go down to those who are quite young. The girls, the figures that are available is that girl child enrollment has increased, even in northern Nigeria. Is this not a positive sign?
No, it is a positive sign, but from quite a low base. Nigeria has the greatest out-of-school children in the world. Of course, this wasn't helped by COVID, and it's been made more difficult by insecurity, particularly in the north. But we know how much value generally parents put on educating their children, particularly their boy child. What we're trying to encourage is for the parents to see the value of investing in the girl child. If a girl completes school, she's far less likely to have an early marriage, to have an early pregnancy. She's much more likely to succeed in creating her own economic career and therefore that of her children. So I agree there are some steps forward, and this is a hugely important priority for my government. We've just launched our own women and girls strategy. We've put women and girls at the heart of absolutely everything we do. But I think to tackle the underlying drivers, we've got to find out what's causing the problem. Is it a cultural issue? Is it a religious issue? And we've got to challenge those long-held traditional beliefs, and probably do that through some of the traditional rulers. The religious leaders themselves need to step up and stand up and encourage members of their community to educate all their children, not just the boys.
So, High Commissioner, in terms of Nigeria's vast culture, Nigeria is probably the biggest country with the highest amount of diverse peoples. What's your impression about all of that? Because the other day when you had the reception with your colleague who's also heading back to the States, I'm talking about Mary Beth Leonard, I saw you in the Nigerian costume. I was like, wow, this High Commissioner is tech.
Well, it's one of the reasons I wanted to come to Nigeria, because there's no country in Africa, or indeed globally, who I think can beat Nigeria on culture. What's really interesting is that you're strong in all of the arts, so the visual arts, in literature, in music, in film, in dance, in all aspects, and that's pretty unique. I don't think I can think of another country that's strong in all of them, and I'm passionate about arts and culture, so I'm obviously in the right place. So there's different dimensions to this. One is just the different individual microcultures, as you mentioned. 36 states, but even within those states, the different subcultures. So everywhere I've traveled, I like to experience the local culture, whether it's through dance, through theatre. I like to go to the local museums. Sometimes they're a little bit crumbly and run down, but there's always a proud curator who's so keen to show me the different history of the different states that I'm in. So that's one aspect for me. In terms of art, I had a wonderful art trip down to Lagos and bought a fantastic piece at the Nike Art Gallery. So that's another of my passions. And on literature, so just before I left, one of my team actually is a poet, and he organised a fantastic poetry reading for me. Literature, I mean, obviously you've got the famous Nigerian authors, but there are so many more. So I've enjoyed all the literature, and finally, dance and music. I'm a very keen dancer. So I've been doing the local Fulani dancing. I've been going low, low, low down across the river. I mean, the beat starts, I'm on the dance floor. And of course, the fabric, the beautiful Ankara, and I've got so many Nigerian dresses. I don't know when I'm going to wear them all. But of course, you have to have a new one made for each wedding you attend. So one thing I know, I'm going to be back in Nigeria. So if anyone wants to invite me to a wedding, I'm available. But it's just been the most wonderful experience, and of course the amazing Benin bronzes, which I can't fail to mention. And I was so delighted to visit Benin City and to see the artisans still making the modern version of these beautiful, beautiful Benin bronzes. The Durbars, I mean, I could go on. The culture is just amazing, so rich, and I wish people knew more about Nigeria's culture, so I'll play my part. And I've lived in promoting as a little ambassador for Nigeria on culture.
Hey, Commissioner, 4.5 years in Nigeria is a long time, because I know if a kid was born today, 4.5 years, that kid will run up and down this your living room. Where are you headed next? I probably can't say definitively because it's still being negotiated. So I'll be going back to the UK for a little bit whilst my next posting is finalised. But I am going to be doing another posting, and I'm hoping it's going to be on the continent still.
Catriona Laing, the outgoing British High Commissioner to Nigeria after about 4 years in the country. Today is our official last day in Nigeria, and I wish her all the best and good luck in her next posting, and sincere appreciation to all of you that have been watching the program and to all the crew members who have made this possible. Thanks a lot. Until I come again to your TV station, enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.